All right, welcome to Civics Ain't Dead. I'm Josh, here with my friend Johnny, and tonight we're going to talk about something we haven't talked about before, which is this guy named Donald Trump. So, we have heard through the grapevine from family and friends that people think we're negative and that we may or may not have this thing called Trump derangement syndrome. Which has been making the rounds on through the media as a way to rationalize and explain this hysteria that we have about this one man and our hatred for him. And so I was thinking with Johnny, we just had an episode on kind of the current state of the GOP and what we call the corrupt bargain that a lot of Republicans have made to gain power vis-a-vis Trump and his resurgence to power in 2024 with the election. And we thought maybe this is a good time to spend a little bit of time talking about Trump himself and what does Trump gain from being back in the White House for a second time, and also more broadly, why do we hate him so much? And hate is a strong word. But I think it applies here, at least just speaking for myself.
I wouldn't use hate's not the first word that comes to mind. I think despise is a better word. I don't hate him, but I just despise what he stands for. Anyway, we're going to get into this.
Yeah, you've doubled the syllables on your word choice. Good job.
I have, yeah.
I mean, the more insidious accusation behind the idea that we have Trump derangement syndrome is that a lot of times, coupled with that, is that we're somehow rooting for America to fail, or we're rooting for Trump to fail first
rooting
of all, and then
America, yeah.
Because of that, we're rooting against America, and that, to me, flies completely in the face of what we're doing, what we stand for, and what we believe. We're certainly rooting for America every step of the way. We want America to be the best version of itself. We want to have as much opportunity and wealth and equality for as many people as possible to live their own version of the American dream, whatever that might mean to different people. What we see with Trump is, that not happening. I think we see with Trump a guy who's in it for himself and seeking to do a couple things. One, profit off the White House, and also, honestly, stay out of jail. So there's this real disconnect, I think, between people who accuse us of having Trump derangement syndrome and what we see ourselves doing, which is resisting someone who really, in our minds, does not have America in his best interests. He has himself in his best interest, and that is very much at odds with what would be good for the majority of the American population. So I'll just start there.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah. I mean, the reason I find Trump despicable is not because I hate the guy personally, right? I've never met the guy. It's that I despise the fact that he undermines what I see as American values and principles. I'm a patriot. I love America, right? I want America, like you said, to live up to its values. And if someone is actively and aggressively undercutting those values, yeah, I despise that person, okay? Especially when it's someone who's in power, who has supposedly sworn to uphold those values, and yet seems to be actively undermining them or undercutting them. So, yeah.
And a big part of this is that we're told constantly to calm down, right? I mean, we did start a podcast, kind of the most cliche thing you can do in the 2020s. We're aware, right?
Take ourselves that seriously.
Right.
Hopefully everyone knows that.
hopefully all the 7 viewers watching this still um, know in their heart of hearts that we are not taking ourselves too seriously. But the idea that we need to calm down, it's such an easy thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it says more about the person telling us that than it does us, right? I mean, the common retorts we get are, it couldn't possibly be that bad. I think a lot of people who are just kind of marginally paying attention, turn on the news from time to time, see a headline or two, they think, at least in America, it couldn't possibly be that bad. Um,
Yeah. Or they just chalk it. Well, that's just Trump being Trump. It'll calm down.
and
It'll
I've
blow
heard
over.
I've heard we have a system of checks and balances. If it ever got that bad, we have a system of checks and balances. Did you not learn that in high school government, Josh? So I mean, we've talked about the authoritarian underpinnings of a lot of what's going on and why that scares us. Um, but that really is fueling a lot of this, what is called, Trump derangement syndrome, that people are freaking out. I think it's safe to say I'm freaking out, maybe on a daily basis. I mean, I'm still waking up and living my life and laughing and stuff with my kids, but it's also a scary time. And
It. I'll say, yeah. It's scary. It's worth freaking out over. It's also just depressing, right? Like, and maybe I'm naive, right? For 30 some years of my life, I've grown up thinking that America was the best answer to, you know, representative government, to equal rights, to human rights, to equality, or some vision of that, at least, right? Maybe we don't always live up to those values, but we're aspiring to them, and we're the closest humanity has gotten to them. Um, and as a historian and as like someone who's tuned into the world, I know we have shortcomings, but I also can't think of countries that until recently um, didn't also have some shortcomings like that. And so it's depressing for me to wake up for the first prolonged period of my life. And again, this maybe shows naivety, but wake up and think, gosh, America's doing this. Gosh, America's doing that, right? Like, we're living in a country now where masked armed men are rounding up people on streets and no one's blinking about it, right? Or saying much at all about deploying troops to civilian, metropolitan spaces, and rounding up homeless people at the point of a gun. I mean, that those are just a few like newsworthy points, but it is depressing to me to wake up as an American patriot and someone who has taken great pride in democracy and representative government and America's history. Right, we're both historians. I teach American history, but to start to kind of have that foundational confidence shook by current events is a weird mental place to be, I think. Um, and so call it Trump derangement syndrome if you want to. I call it tyrant derangement syndrome. But uh, I think the people that are deranged are the people that think that this is normal, right?
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, again, though, yes, I think people who are saying it's normal are deranged. I think there's also a lot of MAGA supporters who understand it's not normal, but view it in a more positive light, as like this is a break from the past, at least of the past
Well,
half
yeah,
century.
I've seen this on social media. Like, I voted for this, right? Like, saying that about the really weird stuff that's happening. Uh,
Yeah. And I mean, I see that as the fact that it's not normal. You can be depressed about it and be cynical about it, but also you can be optimistic and say, this is an opportunity to fight for what we believe America should be
Wake
in the
up,
future.
yeah.
If there's going to be some sort of reset or restart or whatever with the next elections, God willing, that can be exciting and uh, energizing as well
Yeah,
as depressing.
right. Yeah.
Um, so again, we've been personally told in various ways, we're not rooting for America. We're possibly un-American, even for doing this podcast. Um, Johnny, you've studied American history extensively. You know a lot about early American history. Like, would you say that throughout American history, it's been a requirement to support presidents kind of carte blanche?
No, definitely not. Right? Like I think it's totally acceptable to say you're a patriot, you're pro-American, or even you're skeptical about America, right? And its shortcomings. And that doesn't make you anti-American, doesn't make you a non-patriot, and it certainly doesn't make you not a patriot to root against a president or to actively, engage and push back against a presidency, right? I mean, yeah, there is this idea that, well, you've got to root for the president to succeed because that's like rooting for America. First of all, I don't put my whole American patriotism into the body of any one man, right? I mean, that would be monarchy, and I'm not a monarchist. The state and the person of our leader are two very different things, right? We, the people, as the Constitution said, we're the body politic here, right? We're the nation. Okay, so who the president is shouldn't actually matter that much. But I'm old school like that. But there's plenty of precedent where you can look back through American history and say, well, rooting for the president doesn't make any sense. Actually, you wouldn't root. I don't think, right? If you say you always got to support the president, well, there's lots of presidents I disagree policy wise on in history, right? When Andrew Jackson pushes through Indian removal, I don't think most people, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, as long as you're on the right moral spectrum, you wouldn't say, yeah, I hope Andrew Jackson succeeds at Indian removal, right? Looking back in hindsight. Now, at the time, it was actually a popular policy, but looking back, we would say, no, we would hope that president didn't succeed at that particularly heinous moment in American history. You wouldn't root for FDR to round up innocent Asian Americans and put them in internment camps, right? You wouldn't root for Andrew Johnson to undermine Abraham Lincoln's, early efforts at Reconstruction in the South. There's plenty of times when you wouldn't want to root for a U.S. president, right? Maybe you don't want to root for Richard Nixon to get away with Watergate. Maybe you don't want to root for I mean, those are a couple examples. Harding, the Teapot Dome scandal. Presidents make mistakes. They're fallible people, just like the rest of us, and they don't. They're not a stand-in for the country. There's also plenty of good examples of good American patriots actively rooting against presidents, right? So you don't have to go too far to think through this as an example, right? Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. You'd be hard pressed to find anyone who would paint Thomas Jefferson as not an American patriot, not as someone who is rooting for America. But during John Adams's presidency, he described John Adams as a, quote, blind, bald, crippled, toothless man who is a hideous, hermaphroditic character with neither the force and fitness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman. Jefferson was definitely not rooting for John Adams as president, right? And we can debate where we fall on the Federalist, anti-Federalist spectrum, and what Jefferson, critiqued about Adams and what Adams did as president. We can debate all those historical points. The point being, Thomas Jefferson, very pro-America, very anti-President Adams, right? During Andrew Jackson's administration, there was literally a group of senators and congressmen that formed what they call the anti-Jacksonian party, right? Like that's not like a policy disagreement. They were opposed to Jackson in their name. And this included people like Davy Crockett, who opposed Jackson because of Indian removal. Davy Crockett's a patriot, right? You ask anyone in Texas, they'll tell you Davy Crockett's a patriot. But it also included people like Daniel Webster, Henry Clay, John Quincy Adams, right? Like very prominent American patriots during the early national period. And that's just, that's early America. We can think of plenty 20th century examples of active patriots opposing individual presidents. So I think that it's, you know, that's a 2 minute claim that if you sit back and actually think through it beyond your 2 minutes of passionate accusation, you'd realize pretty quickly, yeah, I guess I'm not always rooting for the president in American history. And I guess I can still be a patriot when I root against a president or root against a presidential administration, um, or critique America in general, right? Like, um, you know, I I saw this juxtaposition of quotes recently. So Stephen Miller, who we all know is one of Trump's main advisors, was on Meet the Press or somewhere, and he said, the powers of the president will not be questioned. Um, that's quite a statement, right? A much more American, a much more patriotic statement comes from someone like Teddy Roosevelt, who said that to announce that there must be no criticism of a president or that we are to stand by the president right or wrong is not only unpatriotic and servile, but is morally treasonable to the American public, right? And if Teddy said it that well, I think we can leave it be there, that this is a long history of American patriotism in opposition to an individual president, right? Um, if you think that your loyalty to a one man equals patriotism, you got to go back to basic civics, which is why we're here, right? Civics ain't dead, and it's more relevant than ever.
Yeah, and I think there is this long history of heinous acts by presidents. There are those C-SPAN polls that get this bipartisan group of historians to come out and rank presidents, which is off the bat kind of a ridiculous premise, to rank them in one list. But generally speaking, you can find out, who are the people at the front of the line, your Washingtons, your Lincolns, your FDRs, your Eisenhowers, your Jeffersons, and who are the people at the back of the line, right? Your Buchanans, your Johnsons, your Franklin Pierces. It's way too early to put any of the last few presidents on there with any kind of historical credibility, right?
Sure, I have a
However,
submission for you.
however, I think what we would want to do with the remainder of this episode is lay out some of the basic reasons why I think we would say you don't need 100 years of time to develop the opinion that Trump would probably fall pretty far down on that list.
Yes.
Um, so we've kind of thought about some of the big umbrella topics in which we find what Trump's doing and what Trump has done over the past 10 years to be not only like morally despicable but kind of also criminally despicable, right?
Yeah, and
Or just criminal.
patriotically reprehensible, right? Like, yeah,
Yes. With the point being, to support these things would be unpatriotic,
yes,
and to resist against them and call for accountability and justice would be to be patriotic. I think that's our basic premise.
yeah, exactly.
Um, right. And the first of these kind of three umbrella topics is, the criminal behavior, going back to his first term and certainly campaigning in his first term, right? Um, the argument in defense of this is that most of these things are hoaxes, that
Right,
they're not
trumped
real.
up charges, right? That it's a witch hunt. I mean, this was
Yes.
certainly the rhetoric he used between 2020 and 2024 to kind of mount his comeback. That he was being unduly persecuted. It's a witch hunt from activist prosecutors in New York or in wherever, the DOJ, and that's so it's all a hoax.
Yes. Which is a stew, a discursive stew, not trying to sound overly academic, but a discursive stew in which fascism really, really ferments very well, right? If no one but dear leader can decide what is true and what's false, then we're there. We're in 1984 already.
Yeah.
If you want to just dismiss everything we go through and say it's all a hoax, it's all a witch hunt, he didn't do anything wrong, you can do that. But we wouldn't sit here and talk about this stuff if we didn't think it was serious.
And that might be a great example of a true DTS situation, right? Like, if you're able to overlook every tangible criminal accusation, not even necessarily just the ones he's been found guilty of, yeah, um, then you're living in a different reality.
Yeah. And again, one more disclaimer, like, this is there's no way to make this comprehensive.
No, no, this episode would be way too long if we went through all of the problems. But tell me about some of these crimes, Josh.
Yeah, so let me just I got some well, they're laundry lists of things. So let me just lay some of them out, and then we'll go from there.
Josh is our real researcher for this podcast. If
No,
people haven't figured this out, Josh actually comes prepared with notes.
no, false, fake news. All right, so let's just start with the first term. What we would say are credible accusations of at least 48 criminal offenses while serving as president or campaigning for president prior to 2016. 13 counts, campaign finance crimes and cover up. 2 counts of the destruction of presidential records. 13 counts obstructing the Russia and special counsel investigations. 21 counts on attempting to steal the 2020 election. 2 counts on falsifying public financial disclosure reports. And 5 counts of bribery for attempting to get Ukraine to interfere in the 2020 election. If you recall, that's what led to the first impeachment
Mueller, yeah.
by the House. There's more, but I'm going to not even get into that. And again, just to recap, there was a moment where certainly the two of us, and I think a lot of people thought Trump was done in the interim between January 6th, 2021, and I don't know, maybe the year before this most recent election and the run up to it, when we realized, oh, like, no, he still has legs. Trump went through a series of 4 indictments, only one of which ended up getting resolved and resulting in the 34 felonies that he currently has as president. Right,
Mm-hmm.
Guilty on all counts, and that was the hush money payoff for
Stormy Daniels.
Stormy Daniels, days before the 2016 election. There was also the federal indictment on the classified document charges in Florida, where he was accused of not just keeping classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, but then developing a scheme to conceal that and not cooperate with the authorities in returning those things. Right. Then you had the federal indictment in 2020 for the 2020 election interference case. His actions, which eventually led to January 6th, conspiracy to defraud the U.S., and so forth. Just a little thing. And then you also have the state indictment for the 2020 election interference case for Fulton County, Georgia.
Georgia, right.
Which is where he's trying to, quote unquote, find 11,780 votes.
Yeah. And it was Republicans, we should remind everyone, it was Republicans in Georgia that actually held on to their character and said, no, we're not doing this, right? They didn't back down either at the state level with a Republican governor or at the county level with, just volunteer poll workers, good American citizens doing their civic duty there and not giving in to bullying and intimidation and everything else that came out of that.
Yeah. And that's to say nothing to Mike Pence, right? And his refusal to, play ball with Trump on certifying or refusing to certify the election. So that's term 1. Somehow it may have gotten worse. Now we're only, it's August 27th, right? So we're not even a full 8 months or
Yeah.
barely a full 7 months into Trump's second term. Um, and certainly there's less kind of uh, legal discourse on things that have been crimes that have been committed so far. But
Hmm.
just going through, let's say, like the first 5 months, um, there's plenty to talk about, as we've been talking about in other episodes. But here are some what many scholars and lawyers would say are potentially impeachable offenses right off the bat in just the first 5 months. Okay, unlawful mobilization of military forces against civilian protesters in the United States, illegally and unconstitutionally kidnapping and imprisoning U.S. residents without due process and in violation of their constitutional and statutory rights, unconstitutionally usurping Congress's power, defying court orders and usurping judicial authority, terminating DOJ and FBI officials based on retribution, largely for previous work on investigations into a lot of these past allegations that I
Right.
just mentioned, co-opting and dismantling federal agencies for corrupt purposes. That would be Doge. Unlawfully imposing tariffs. It's the role of Congress.
Right.
Receiving foreign and domestic emoluments. The 400 million Qatari jet is just one of them, which is a great business deal according to him, right? Improperly using emergency and wartime powers.
Yeah.
The use of the quote unquote national emergency and invasion language to describe what's going on along the southern border, just as one example. Abusing the pardon power, all of those insurrectionists that he incited in January 6th. First day in office, pardoned.
Pardoned. Yeah.
Blanket pardons. Moving on, depriving citizens of their birthright citizenship, guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. I mean, that's ongoing. And impeding and obstruction efforts to secure United States elections and protect against cyber attacks. That's a topic for another episode. But the point is, many, if not all of these, are on their own impeachable offenses that if anyone else had committed, Fox News would be having an aneurysm. But if you consider the fact that this is just about 5 months of evidence and you take all of them together,
I know.
uh, again, it doesn't feel like hyperbole to say like democracy is at stake right
Yeah.
now.
Well, and I would just point out, right, this because this is the criminal category of why we root against Donald Trump, right? And the gamut that this runs is everywhere from what you could argue are political things, right? Like he ran on being hard on immigration and now he's denying birthright citizenship. That's just a policy difference, right? Like you could maybe, if you had, you know, if you had drank enough Kool-Aid, you could say, well, that's just, you're critiquing his policies. But it runs the gamut from those types of kind of politicized indictments or impeachable offenses all the way down to like, yeah, he slept with you know, a porn star and then paid her illegal hush money from campaign finances, right? And so like the seediest crime you can think of to like the most nefarious authoritarian crime you can think of, he really runs the gamut, right? Everywhere in between to like misplacing classified documents and then lying about it or whatever, right? All of these different things that you just laid out. Um, he's not a one-trick pony when it comes to crime, and that's notable. Richard Nixon, the best, probably the best comparable example in the presidential office in modern times. Famously left office, resigned with the words "I'm not a crook." Right? Clearly, he had committed espionage against a political opponent. Right? Um, but that might have been Nixon's only domestic criminal offense, let's say, right? I mean, he was not wheeling and dealing on this full spectrum of criminal activity. He wasn't a crook, right? Like he was not a uh, a professional crook the way Donald Trump. Absolutely, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, you have to admit that your man's a crook. Maybe you like him, because he's a crook, but he's as crooked as they come, um, and as criminal as you could imagine someone sitting in the White House being.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say Nixon. I think Watergate did expose a deeper sense of corruption with Nixon that played out in different ways, but certainly we're talking about two different ballparks here. Maybe Watergate is the moment in American history which lays the foundation for someone like Trump to come along and just govern with impunity. I don't know. Um,
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of like a bad mashup of Warren Harding and Richard Nixon, right? Like he's power hungry like Nixon and paranoid like Nixon. He's also like sloppy and corrupt like Warren Harding, right? So he's some bad, I don't know, mashup of the two, which gets us into the next category, which is this corruption stuff, right? Because it's not, yes, it's the criminal stuff, but there's more than just the normal criminal stuff to Trump's corruption. Um, you know, I would, I mean, you can read estimates about how much money his family has accumulated over the course of these two presidencies now. And that's not normal either, right? Like most presidents do not get rich quick by becoming president and brokering all of these um, personally aggrandizing deals. And I would just point out that, even in Trump's first term, he broke all kinds of presidential precedents in where he, either punted or outright refused to divest from his companies. Most presidents, when they become president, they put their property into a trust so they don't touch it again until after they've left office, so that their personal business interests don't interfere with presidential business or the interests of the country. Um, you know, Trump was supposed to release his tax returns way back in 2016. He never did. He was the first modern president to not do so since the Nixon administration. And so there's that, you know, precedent of anti-corruption that he broke immediately in 2016, and we've kind of just gotten numb to that when it comes to Trump now. And this second administration, the second term, he's really just kind of full on embraced the grift of accepting, bribes from foreign countries, blatantly, like that jet. Um, you know, Not making any bones about his personal trips to Scotland to, see his new course open at the same time he's promoting different, bitcoins or cryptocurrencies or whatever, right? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. I'm sure you have better examples than I'm coming up with, Josh, but
no, I mean, I think those are a lot of the big ones. You see a lot of Middle Eastern countries and their leaders investing in these cryptocurrency schemes. Um, the one other golf related example I have is in Vietnam, where you see there seems to be a direct correlation between the reduction in tariffs on Vietnamese exports and the fact that Trump also just so happens to be building what I think is going to be his largest per square mile golf course in that country. So I mean, and but this goes back to you start with the Jared Kushner story with getting the Saudis to invest 2 billion in I think his private equity firm, which was starting up at the time. Um, there's all kinds of kind of foreign entanglements, which are like right off the bat so sketchy and so skeevy and so like such a red flag
yeah,
that if it was anyone else, it'd be. I mean, we've heard about Hunter Biden's laptop, which, to my knowledge, has no incriminating evidence on Joe Biden when he was president or vice president um, involved with any of this. Now, Hunter
yeah.
Biden's a different story, but you see how quick the right wing media would latch onto something as just like a laptop. Where is the accountability for Trump? There's a New Yorker journalist named David Kirkpatrick who has attempted recently to provide an estimate for how much money the Trump family has gained while in office. Um,
Yeah.
it's a good article. I think it's a work in progress. They published a version of the article, and he's still, I think, refining it and tweaking the numbers. But his premise is like, if Trump's business dealings were in any way, shape, or form in process prior to his political career, that money and that revenue is not counted in his sum.
Hmm.
His current sum of Trump profiting off the White House is $3.4 billion.
Crazy. Yeah.
And again, like, who knows? Maybe another person would come up with 2.5 billion, and another person would come up with
Right.
4.8. The point
Point
is,
is, it's a lot of money. Yeah.
it's billions of dollars,
Yeah.
right? And it's not like the merchandise. There's a whole other story of the merchandise with the Trump store and the fact that a lot of people are buying "Make America Great Again" hats, thinking they're donating to his campaign, when in fact they're not. They're just paying him personally that money. It's really obscure, that issue. But this guy Kirkpatrick puts the merchandise sales, the Bibles, the watches, the perfume, the whatever,
Yeah.
at like $20 million of revenue. So that's a drop in the bucket
Yeah.
compared to a lot of these other investments, which are foreign governments and
Yeah.
the leaders of foreign governments
Yeah.
making deals with him personally. Um,
Yes.
it's, I guess, by by the letter of the law, I guess, as long as they disclose it, it's legal. But it's about as unethical
Yeah.
as one could describe.
Well, and I don't know that I'd give the benefit of the doubt that everything's being disclosed either, right? I mean, this is a guy who has consistently refused to show his tax returns, consistently refused to show his books, um, unless required to by a court, and and some of the accusations and criminal charges against Trump have been um, either overinflating values, underinflating values of his property. So I don't think clean bookkeeping is necessarily what you should expect from this either. So yeah, I I I'm trying to think about a defense if I was to play devil's advocate or set this up as a straw man to knock down. Um, and I guess that the defense to this is, well, they all get rich. All those congressmen inside trade. Look at Nancy Pelosi's portfolio. The scale at which Donald Trump is doing this is not like anyone else in Congress. Yes, Obama charges high speaker fees. Yes, Bill Clinton has the Clinton Foundation. Yes, there's a lot of money moving around at the top elite levels of politics. But Trump is blatantly greasing his wheels from his position of power, and I don't think anyone who's looking at it can unsee that, right? It's just a matter of, I guess, normalizing it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say two things. I think the Nancy Pelosi camp and the Obama and Clinton camp are two different things. I don't see why anyone would have any problem with a president after they've left office, making money. And certainly every president, I think, except for Biden, really, because, well, he's old and he's only been out of office for a year or so. Um, every recent president in modern memory has made a lot of money after
Yeah,
office
right.
with
They,
speaker fees and
they
so forth.
write books. All that stuff.
And their notoriety and their fame is much higher than it was before they became president. That's just a fact of the way it goes, I think. And I think that's like good for them. The Nancy Pelosi camp, like, no, we're not Nancy Pelosi fans.
No.
Like, any politician who's playing the stock market with any sort of insider knowledge, like, that should be investigated, and I think
Should
generally
be,
speaking, any
yes,
congressperson who's
illegal.
playing the stock market, like that should be something that as a country we should all collectively agree is not cool. But if you're gonna for a second criticize Nancy Pelosi of anything, then you better have Donald Trump even higher up because again, like anything Nancy Pelosi has done,
Right.
unethically, illegally, whatever,
Yeah, it's
Trump is
percentages to Trump's billions. Yeah.
yeah, which is our point because we've heard a million times in one how much Nancy Pelosi sucks, and yeah, we agree, but like again, the scale.